Here we are in TouchDesigner. We're going to step through this mini project, which is just going over basic compositing using tops, texture operators, and how we can order those, the sort of transformation options that are available to us there, and just sort of getting around the interface a little bit. So we've already done a quick introduction to the interface in class. For a refresher, I would recommend looking at TouchDesigner's tutorials. They have a playlist of a Norway workshop, and they step through things really well. So I would send you in that direction if you want to have another look at the basics. Just the first video in that playlist will get you up and running. So for the moment, I'm going to close the palette. I'm going to hit P to close my parameter window, which isn't working. What's up? Okay, I'm going to hit P again, close my parameter window. Didn't have the keyboard plugged in. Okay. I'm also going to delete all of this, and the first thing that I'm going to do is save my project. So I'm going to save this on my desktop in a new folder. Always important to make a folder when you're starting a new project. I'm going to call this my project. And hit save. You'll remember that there's this incremental saving convention in TouchDesigner. So every time you save, that number increments, so you can always roll back as long as you don't delete those files. Now, I know that I'm going to want to bring in some assets to this, so let's copy those assets into the project folder that I just made. The project folder I just made was on my desktop. My project, and I'm going to make a new folder in here called assets. This isn't strictly required, but it's a good practice to keep things organized. And I have somewhere here a PNG with some transparency for us to play with. Do I? I know it's here. Let's copy it over here. Okay, cool. So the asset that I'm going to be working with is this. It's a sort of grass field background with a transparent area that we can use to practice compositing. First thing I'm going to do is hit Tab to bring up my operator list, and I'm already on my top tab where I can access all my texture operators. So that's where I want to be. I'm going to start by typing movie. Hold on. Movie. And you can see it starts filtering the tops that contain this string. And the top that I want is movie file in. I'm just going to put that there. And I'm going to hit H just to home my network in on this operator that I'm going to be working with. By default, you get this banana. If you don't have any assets to play around with, then you can stick with this banana, that's fine. You can see up here in the file, if I expand this parameter, I hit P to bring up this parameter window. And then if I expand this parameter, you can see it's giving me the path to this banana. In this case, it's a TIFF file. And what's down here is actually a little bit of Python using this app.samples folder. Is inbuilt variable that will give you all the samples that come with Touch. We don't want that. We want to go to our project folder, assets, grassy.png. So the movie top will let you work with videos and still images. Lots of things to play with. We'll get into that as we go in the course. I'm going to close that for the moment. Okay. I'm going to start by adding a null So I hit Tab to open up my operator create dialog, started typing null, hit enter, there's my null. I'm going to connect my movie file into my null. And something that I like to do is hit this display flag on the end of my chain, which will display the contents of this null in the background of the network editor. So as you're working in your network editor, you can see your output. It's quite a nice way to work. Great. So what we want to do is composite this PNG with some background images that we're going to generate directly in Touch. I'm going to do this a little bit differently than we did in class, just to show you some other things. The first thing that I want to do is create a vertical gradient in the background to simulate like a either a clear sky or even a sunset, something like that. So I'm going to hit Tab again. I'm on my top page. I'm going to open up gradient. What am I looking for? Ramp. It's called ramp. We're looking for the ramp operator. And this will give us a gradient that we can change in various ways. So hit P to bring up our parameters again. And the main things that we can play with here, under type, we've got vertical, which will change it to a vertical gradient. We've also got radial and circular. We'll look at using circular in a minute, but for the moment, I'm going to set this to horizontal, vertical. Cool. And we're going to want to create a sky-like background gradient. So if I think about what the sky might look like, let's just have a look at what the sky looks like. Here's a good example. So on a sunny day, you might notice that the horizon tends to be lighter than the sky. So we're going to want to recreate this sort of gradient for our little image. So I'm going to start by clicking this left little handle on my gradient. I'm going to set this to be blue. I'm going to turn its saturation up and its value up just so I can start to see things. Now we want this to be a bit light, so I'm going to pull its saturation down. Something like that. So we've sort of got a very pale blue. Now up here I'm going to click my other little handle in my gradient. I'm going to set this to be blue as well. And I'm going to pull the value down a little bit so it's a little bit dark. I might also pull the saturation down a little bit. Okay, cool. Like that. Okay, we've got a sky. Let's composite this with our grass. There are lots of ways to do this in Touch. There are quite a few compositing operators. Some that I can see, there's the chroma key, which will do sort of quasi green screen effects. There's add, which will just add the two elements together. Composite is sort of a catch-all that lets you do other things like multiply, add, things like that. What else do we have? Difference can be quite fun to play with. Is inside one? Yeah, inside's a compositor. We're going to use over. And I'm going to want to composite my movie file in over the top of my gradient. And I'm going to hook my over up to my null so this becomes our background. Great, so that's sort of working, but we note that our image is now square and it looks a bit pixelated. If I go to my overtop and click and hold the mouse wheel, you'll see we get this little pop-up that gives us information about what's happening in this particular operator. And if I look here, our size is 256 by 256. Now that's not really what we want. If we go and do the same thing over a movie file in, we can see we're 1280 by 720, and we want this resolution to persist throughout our network. What we really want is this gradient to match our match our image rather than the other way around. And the way that we can change that is in our overtop. I'll hit P again to bring up the parameters. And this first option here, fixed layer, this determines which layer the overtop will use to set its own resolution. So if I choose input 1, that's going to use the first input to set its resolution. If I mouse click or mouse wheel click, you can see it's now 1280 by 720. Great, doesn't look too bad. There are a few other options in here that you should be aware of. So the prefit overlay determines how the second layer will adjust itself to the fixed layer. So if I drop down here, one to be aware of is native resolution. So with native resolution, this second layer is still composited under my grass, but the image isn't stretched or squashed in any way. It is pixel for pixel the size of this image. Now, other things to be aware of is in this overtop, we've got other options here like rotate, translate. Remember, you can either hold left click in here and it'll bring up this little handy number scrubber sort of thing that lets you change in different orders of magnitude. So if you want to make, say, a small change, we can do that here. Set that back to 0. We can scale, we can change the pivot. So that's like changing the anchor point in something like Photoshop. In our case, where we want this to fill, actually I'm going to set this to fill horizontal. Maybe we want fill vertical. Looks better. No, we want fill horizontal. Good. Okay, that's better. That's fine. So this image now is being stretched to match our 1280 by 720 image. Great. We've sort of got a sky, we've got our grass. Let's add some clouds. So to do that, we're going to use the noise top. Noise. There it is. Noise. The noise top will let us generate different kinds of noise. And this noise will be interpreted in a texture. One of the nice things about this noise is it can be generated on the graphics card. So sometimes if you want to do noise effects, this is a fast way to do it. Noise is very useful for procedurally generating all sorts of things. If you want waves, or in this case we'll make clouds, or even using it as a force to apply to other elements in the world. It's a good way of simulating organic things, or making something random, but not so random that it's all spiky and all over the place. It's a nice way of making pretty random things. Here's an example of random, just as a bit of a tangent. So if something's completely random, every single one of these pixels is going to be a random value between 0 and 1. So 0 is black, white is 1, and grey is everything in between. Let's just pop this up here. And you'll notice that pixel to pixel, they are completely different. It could be completely black in one, it could be completely white in the other. Each pixel has no relation to the pixels around it. So that's what complete randomness looks like. Noise, on the other hand, every pixel will be quasi-random, but it will sort of change its value to be close to the pixels around it. So what I mean by that is if I go Perlin 2D, that should be fine. You'll notice this is still sort of random, but it's sort of smooth. So every pixel will not change entirely from the pixels next to it. There's a sort of a black spot here, but it fades slowly up to grey, and then it might fade up to white. So this is the difference between noise and complete randomness. Okay, let's go with Perlin noise. We're actually going to want 3D noise. You can play with the settings here to adjust what the noise looks like. So you notice period will, it's sort of like zooming in and out of an image. Let's go like that. Harmonics, this will change the complexity of the noise. Harmonic spread, okay, we're getting sort of cloudy. That feels pretty good. And I also want to bring the what do I want to do? Bring the amplitude, yeah, offset. Offset's what I want, I think. Let's pull it down a little bit. There we go, that's sort of cloudy. The other thing that I want to do is over on common, actually over on output, I want to turn alpha off. There we go. So now I've got white clouds on a transparent background, which is what we're going to want. Great. So next step, we want to composite our clouds here over the top of our ramp before we composite it over our or under our grass. So as far as the order of things, we're going to want our blue sky in the background, followed by our clouds, followed by our grass. So if you're thinking of this as back to front, we're going sky, clouds, grass. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is composite our clouds on top of our sky. And to do that, I'm going to use another overtop. So hit tab, tap over. I want my sky to be behind my clouds. And there we go. So now we've got sort of a sky with noisy clouds. That's fine. There'll be some things we want to change, but that'll be fine for the moment. And now I'm going to do this little trick. I want to replace this input, this second input on my final overtop with the output from this. There are a couple of ways we can do it. We can either just plug straight in and it will replace that connection, but we can also hover over the wire that we want to replace, let go, and that will replace it. So that looks not too bad. We can sort of see some of the limitations here. So our clouds, our resolution is a bit low, right? So let's change that. Over on my noise, I'm going to make my noise match the resolution of my movie file. So I happen to know this is 1280 by 720. There are ways to automate this so that the noise will automatically match the resolution of the movie. We don't want to look at them right now, but we will get to that. Okay, cool. So we've got clouds, we've got sky, we've got grass. Let's look at animating these clouds. I'm going to hit P to bring up our parameters. I'm going to go to my noise tab, and actually I want to go to my transform tab. Now in my transform tab, I'm just going to have a play around with some of these and find what I might want to animate. Now translate will normally be X, Y, and Z. So if we translate in X, you can see our clouds sort of move left to right. That's pretty good. If we translate up, translate in Y, they sort of move up, which is interesting. That sort of gives the effect of either steam rising or clouds rising, but to me it also feels a little bit like maybe we're on a rotating sphere. It's an interesting effect. But one particularly interesting translation when we're working with noise is translating in its third dimension in Z. So over in noise, here I chose Perlin 3D. That means this is actually a 3D function, a 3D texture. We're seeing one slice of a 3D image. And if we translate through that third dimension, you'll notice we get this sort of morphing sort of effect as we move from one slice to another, sort of moving through this three-dimensional noise field. So that's great. We definitely want to animate that to give it a little bit of life. Let's look at how we might be able to do that. I'll show you a couple of ways to do this. The sort of native TouchDesigner way to do it would be to start looking at using chops to animate. So hit tab, I'm going to hit tab again to go over to my chops, and I'm going to use a little network of chops, which is something that you use all the time, which is a constant chop attached to a speed chop attached to a null. So I'm going to make constant. I think if I hold shift and hit enter, never mind. Constant, and then a speed, and then a null. Great. I'll put these together and just tidy things up a little bit. Right-clicking to box select. Great. So let's have a look at what this actually does. Our constant chop just provides a single value or a set of values. So in this case, it's just giving me a single value. I can control it with this slider, or I can type a number in, like 10 or -10, or maybe something like 10 minus 200. Remember, we can do expressions in this, so simple maths is fine and often very useful. And for our first case, we'll use a value of like 0.5 or something like that. Now, what the speed chop does is it takes a constant and then it increments sort of in response to the value of this constant. So if this constant is something like 100, you'll notice this speed chop, our value is now rising very quickly. If it's something like 10, you can see it's sort of slowed down, and if it's 1, it's slowed down even more. That'll do for the moment. And now we're going to look at our first way of animating a parameter. So I've selected my noise, I've hit P, and I know that the parameter that I want to edit is this one here, which is our translation in Z. The simplest way to do that is to go over to my null, which is what I'm going to export from. I'm going to hit the viewer active button, which means I can now interact with the values inside of this null. I'm going to click and drag it onto the Z parameter. And it's fairly subtle. Oh wait, sorry, it's very subtle because it's not working. Once you click and drag, it'll give you a little pop-up, and I want to select export chop. Okay, it's not subtle at all, it's very, very fast. So now you can see this value here, our translation in Z is moving along at a cracking pace, and that's being driven by this null here. I'm going to hit this viewer active button to turn it back into a regular operator. And I'm going to go over to my constant. I'm going to adjust this. So let's try like a 0.5. So you can see now the clouds are moving at half the speed, but it's still very fast. I'm going to try something more like 0.01. Okay. I think we need something a bit more. So what about 0.05? Probably a bit too much. Let's go 0.02. Okay, yeah. I like that. Great. So we've now got this sort of slowly evolving cloud in the background, which is very nice. But maybe we want to animate this on another axis. So maybe we want to like translate this slowly in this direction or this direction to get a feeling of a sort of horizontal wind. We've looked at using an export, and we can do that for this parameter as well. I could set my null to active. I could drag it over to my translate and choose export chop. And now we've got a wind sort of blowing our clouds along. That's quite nice. That's perfectly valid. But there are lots of other things that we can do with these parameter boxes. This is sort of the most powerful part of Touch. So if I hit this, you'll notice next to it, once I expand a parameter, there are these three boxes, grey, blue, and green. Grey is your standard number, where you can type a number. Blue is an expression, where you can type Python. Or green is an export. So exporting is sort of Touch's native connecting one thing to another. Generally, exporting is the fastest thing to do, performance-wise, but using expressions is extremely flexible and can sometimes be very convenient. Now, what I want to do here is use time, so the current how long TouchDesigner has been open or how long it's been running as a value to drive my translation in the X direction. Now, I can't remember what that Python parameter or operation or function is, so I am going to cheat a little bit. Let's open up a new Chrome tab, and I'm going to go to Matthew Reagan's website. What if we just go Matthew Reagan Media Maker? That sounds like him. Okay, teaching resources, TouchDesigner. Down here, under TouchDesigner Teaching Resources, there's a very handy Operations cheat sheet. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. Top thing, right? This is something we're going to use all the time. Here is a little piece of code that we can use to get seconds, but this is bound to the timeline. So when we hit pause, or when we speed up or slow down our timeline, these seconds will respond to that. That might be something we want, it might not be. In this case, I don't think we do want that. We want this, abstime.seconds. I'll show you what this does. So I'm going to go over to my TX. I'm going to type it directly in here, actually, just to show you that I can. So if this is closed, yeah, never mind. abstime, capital T there, .seconds. Great. Now you can see here our value is ticking up quite quickly. That's fine, but it's a bit fast. I don't think we'd want to be out on such a windy day. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this by some value. So I'm going to multiply by like 0.1. Alright, that's a bit more reasonable. It's still pretty fast, but it's a bit more reasonable. Now one other thing that I want to do is change the direction of these clouds. I want them to blow in the other direction. I know, because I do. So I'm going to multiply our seconds now by -0.1. Alright, now we've got our clouds blowing in the other direction. I'm also going to be a little finicky and slow this down to timesing by -0.005. Okay, that'll do. Great. So let's compare these two sort of ways of operating here. We're using some chops. This is sort of a very native TouchDesigner way of working. In some ways it's a lot more visual and a lot easier to approach if you haven't done any text-based coding before. Then we've got this Python way. If you're proficient in Python, or you're just familiar with other text-based languages, or you just want to get your hands dirty in text-based coding, this could be a good approach for you. I alternate between the two. Sometimes I find having all of these operators up here, these green chops, and maybe I've got a big chain of 8 of them to create some weird modulating parameter. Sometimes I find that sort of clogs up my network a bit and just visually makes it harder to work with. So a lot of the time I prefer working in Python like this, and as long as you've got this to begin with, all you really need is this one little bit, abstime.seconds. Then you can apply simple mathematical operations to that to make it do whatever you want. So for example, we could do something like, we could use modulo, where my modulo is, close, modulo, and now what we're doing is ramping up, and we probably need to use a different one. So now what we sort of have is this repeating loop, probably a bit of a tangent, but just to show you what else is possible. The answer is a lot is possible. Okay, great. So let's just take a second to admire our work. I'm going to right click on our null here and go view, and this will give me my project in a separate window. If you're working on 2 monitors, this can be a good way of having one reference monitor, and then having a nice clean network for you to work with. Very nice. Okay, so we have clouds, we have a background, we have our movie file in, and we've made this nice little scene. Let's add something a little bit more fun. Let's add a rainbow. So I'm going to use my ramp operator again to do this. So hit Tab, go to Tops. I don't know why my search bar stays full. I think that might be a bug. I'm going to look for ramp. Great. Now a rainbow tends to be circular, and it tends to have a whole bunch of colors in it, so let's just pop in a bunch of different keys to make some colors. And I'm going to show you one other thing that we didn't have a look at in class. You'll notice this ramp operator, there's this little purple arrow under it. If I click that, it brings up this light purple or pink operator. This operator is a DAT. So DATs are over here. They deal with tables of data or text. So this DAT here is controlling the color of this ramp. So we can use this to change the values at those different keys. Oops. So you notice here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 keys, and I've got 0, or I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 entries in my table, and each has a position, a red, green, blue, and alpha value. Great. So first I'm going to, on my first key, I'm going to set this viewer to active so I can edit it. On my first key I'm going to set this to 0. So the outside is an alpha of 0, and on my last key I'm going to set that to 0. Just scroll up a bit, you'll notice now the center of my ramp is transparent and the outside of my ramp is transparent. Before we keep editing the colors, I'm going to go over to my parameters again, and on extend left and extend right, I'm going to set these to 0. So now we don't have any repeating colors on the outside or the inside. Cool. Now, colors. What colors do we want? Let's have red. So for my first color, I'll have full red. Let's just go to town on this. I'm going to add one more in here actually. Let's spread these out a little bit. So we're going to go red, yellow, green, blue. Maybe we do only need, yeah, I think we do actually only need 5. Okay, so to delete these little handles, you click them and you drag them off the gradient bar and they disappear. It's pretty quirky, but that's just what you do. Okay, cool. So we've got red. Our next one's going to be green, so that's yellow. So that's red and green together. Our next one's going to be green. And our last one will be blue. Okay, that's suitably ridiculous. I'm happy with that. I'm also going to set this to black, our edge color, just so we get a... actually, no, I'll set it to blue. And I'll set this to red. So the last color here on our outside is red, but it's transparent. Okay, here. You can see our last color is red, so full saturation, full value, completely red, but its alpha is 0. So we're fading from a red with a full alpha down to a red with 0 alpha, so it becomes completely transparent. Similar on this side, the last color is blue with an alpha of 0. Second to last color is blue with an alpha of 1. So we're fading from blue to blue, but with an alpha of 1 to 0. Okay, we have our ridiculous rainbow. We can sort of change how the size of these bands by moving our gradient straps around if you want to do that. I think that's fine. Let's composite it into our image. I'm going to hit this little arrow again to dock my DAT. I might set it to inactive again, just because. Okay, now where in our chain do we want this? I think we want this behind our grass but in front of our sky. So that's going to mean inserting it here. One thing I actually missed. On this over, our fixed layer should be input 1. So that we're 1280 by 720. That will become important momentarily. So I'm going to take my rainbow and I'm going to composite on top of this sky background. Let's hit tab to bring up our operators. Let's type over to make an over. I'm going to put my sky background in the second layer because I want it on the bottom. I'm going to put my rainbow on the first input because I want it on top. And I'm going to connect this straight into our over. I'm going to replace my current sky input. Great. Okay, so we're plugged in, but it's all a little bit over the top at the moment. Let's fix that. So in our this over we just inserted, our fixed layer, we do want that to be input 2 because we want this to be 1280 by 720. If I click and hold, you can see it is 1280 by 720. That's clicking and holding the mouse wheel. But our rainbow is a bit over the top. So here in our prefit overlay, let's see what that looks like at its native resolution. Not bad. Bit small, but fine. Let's work with it. Now, we just want to sort of position it in a nicer spot. Let's put it over here on the left. I'm going to go to Translate X, and I'll just translate it over using our little value adder. I might scale it down a little bit, or move it down in Y a little bit. Okay, it's a rainbow. And let's scale it up. Hey. Very nice. Okay. We'll just admire our work a little bit. Cool, it's a nice little scene, but we want this to be a bit more over the top, a bit more exciting. So let's animate this rainbow in some way. There are parameters that we can work with here. Phase and period can create some interesting effects. But you'll notice we're hitting the outside of our texture here. So we're getting these rectangular chopped off bits when we're working with phase too much. We could get around that by masking, but I don't really want to deal with that. And we get the same problem when working with period. So I'm going to set them back to their defaults. And I'm going to do a little trick using a hue shift to animate this rainbow. First thing I can do is hit tab to bring up our operators. And I'm going to look for HSV adjust. HSV is hue, saturation, and value. I'm going to put this in line with my ramp, my rainbow ramp. Now at the moment it's not doing anything. But if we go into our hue adjuster parameters and have a look for hue offset, if we wiggle this, you'll notice we get some fun animated colors. So this is what we want to animate. Now I could create a set of chops to animate it with some chops, or I could even use this little chop network here that we've already got to animate it, but let's practice our Python. So I'm going to go into my hue offset and I'm going to set it to abs time, just to show you that you can actually do this directly in the parameter. So here I've collapsed that. I've made sure I've set it to grey, which is sort of the standard thing. I'll collapse that parameter. I'm going to type Python directly into here. So I'll say abs time, that's with a capital T, dot seconds. Let's see what that looks like. Interesting. So abs time dot seconds at the moment is a value higher than 360. So what's happening is this value is getting clipped. We can use the modulo operator. And what this will do is, if the value goes above 360, it will wrap around from 0, so you get this sort of ramp effect. I will just hit enter and show you what I mean. So you can see here we're now going up, and once this value gets to 360, it'll go back down to 0 and keep repeating that cycle, so you can sort of mitigate that limit of 360 that we get. Now the other thing is this is moving a little bit slow for my liking, so let's, just before this modulo operator, I'm going to hit star or asterisk, which is multiply. Let's multiply this by 10 to get it going really fast. So we've got abs.time.seconds times 10 modulo 360. Let's hit enter. Hey, that's a little bit more like it. Let's try timesing it by 100. That's much better. Now the final thing is, this is cool and everything, but I'd like my colors sort of radiating outwards rather than sucking inwards. So I want this animation to run in the opposite direction. So instead of going abs.time.seconds times 100 modulo 360, I'm going to say abs.time dot seconds times minus 100 modulo 360. And now my animation is running in the opposite direction. Now you could achieve this exact same thing with chops, and if this is your first adventure into programming of any kind, or creative computing or anything like this, then you might prefer to do it in chops, but just showing you what is possible here using Python. If you get comfortable with it, you might find that it's a very convenient way of doing things. I'm going to hide that parameter, and I'm going to hit P, and let's admire our work. I'm going to right click on my null, go view, and there it is. It's ridiculous, but it's ours, and we should be proud. Great. Well done. To me, to you, to everyone. Now, for those of you in class, I did set an extension exercise to this, which was to build an analog clock. So I'm going to show you just how you might go about that. First I'm going to zoom out, all the way out. Here's project 1, which is the project that we were working in. If I zoom out to the next level, I'm going to create a new comp. And this will be a, what do I want, base? Maybe a base? No, I think I want a container. And then I'm going to go in here, I'm going to call this project 2. I'm going to go in here, and here I'm going to create something else. So just get you started with your extension project. So you're going to build an analog clock. If you have a crack at building an analog clock and you find it too hard, you can try making a digital clock. That is perfectly acceptable as well. But I'll show you what you might need to achieve either of these goals. We're going to start by making a chop. The chop that we want, funnily enough, is clock. If we zoom in here to clock to see what's going on, this is giving us information about the current time in your location. So you get things, particularly fun things like sunrise and sunset, but you also get milliseconds, seconds, minutes, and hours. Now, if we're building a analog clock, you probably only really want to work with minutes and hours and possibly seconds. Seconds might be a good thing to work with because it's because hours and minutes move so slow you might not be able to tell if it's working, but let's look at how we can work with this. Now, the simplest way to isolate some of these is using a select chop. So I'm going to click and drag out and then hit tab and go select and hit P. Now, select lets you filter out different channels. I'm going to, for simplicity's sake, or possibly ease, not necessarily simplicity, I'm just going to select a single parameter. The parameter I'll select is seconds. Now you can make more of these, and maybe in this one you want to, instead of selecting seconds, you might want to select minute. And now you've got your seconds and your minutes, and you can do the same for hour. You can select multiple things in these, so I could say min. Now I've got seconds and minutes. But with the next step in the operations, just to keep things simple, I'd recommend at this stage selecting them out separately. The next thing that we're going to want is a math. And the final thing that we're going to want is a null, because you're going to use this value as a data source for driving an animation. Great. Now, if you have a think about what we're going to do with this data, or what I'm asking you to do, you're going to drive probably rotation of some sort of image, maybe a rectangle. There's a bit of a hint, or it could just be a PNG. But in any case, you're going to drive a rotation, and you want to take this seconds value and convert it into something that's more usable when you're driving a rotation. So if we think about what the range of seconds are, on a clock we've got 0 to 59 seconds, or 0 to 60, so there we go, back down to 0. And we want to turn that into an angle. The and so the degrees that we want to change it to is a range of 0 to 360. So I'm going to say we're starting with a range of 0 to 60, and we're going to a range of 0 to 360. So here we're taking seconds, and we're essentially turning them into degrees. If you wanted, you could rename this channel, but we don't need to do that. Now, similarly, what would happen with minutes? Well, that's actually the same, right? We'd want to change that range from 0 to 60 to 0 to 360. And finally, for hours, you'd probably want to change that to something else, but I'll leave that to you to figure out. So that should get you started on making an animated analog clock. I'll leave the rest to you, and I'll just leave us with one final glance at this beautiful, sunny, idyllic scene that we all made together. I know I would like to go to this place, so I might do that right now.